What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to the Cutlass Board Games channel. We're once again looking at building better balanced setups for Blood on the Clocktower. And our goal in this video is to answer the question, when should you give a Librarian a 0? Because the Librarian text reads, you start knowing that one of two players is a particular outsider or that 0 is in play. Now, let's start with 7 players, and we'll work all the way up to 15. Let's start with 7 players. We obviously need to have the Librarian. Now, there's 2 or 3 different options here for like when it is actually going to be relevant. What I might actually do is just set them up this way, and then I'll slowly change things as I add characters. But let's start with configuration 1, which is this. This is a 7-player game. There is no outsiders by default. There is a Librarian who is supposed to receive a 0, and a Poisoner has selected them. What do we show? Well, if we show a non-drunk character, it has to hit either the Imp or the Poisoner. And then they have to additionally say, yes, I'm that guy, which isn't super likely. You could maybe set up the Imp to say, yes, I'm the Recluse, if they saw the Recluse as one of the bluffs. Or maybe they back into Recluse later. That doesn't seem super likely. Showing the Librarian as 0, which is the thing that they're supposed to get, is also potentially telling the Librarian that there is a Baron in play and that they are the drunk, to not show them who the actual outsider is. I think in a 7-player setup, and I think that some of the other setups where it is 0 outsiders by default, the Librarian seeing 0 will have the reaction where the player is like, why have you chosen to not show me something when there is something? Which is, I think at a lower player count, is a bit rough. In 13 players, where there's 3 minions and the Librarian gets a 0, they go, oh, it's confirmed every other outsider. Every other minion, rather. Which I think is more helpful. But for this setup, I think the Librarian shouldn't really go in the bag. At a 7-player game, we have the Poisoner. But assuming the Poisoner selects no one else, Librarian getting a 0 doesn't actually help solve the game. So perhaps it is not the best choice. Next is the Spy. So the Spy, I think only, yeah, let's kill that guy. Only in the scenario where we have the Undertaker, is the Librarian 0 helpful. Librarian gets a 0, the Spy is executed. Let's say there's a Virgin. It doesn't specifically matter how the Spy is executed. The Spy is executed, and the Undertaker sees an outsider. Like, these are a few different ways that you can reveal the Spy. Because if you see the Virgin activate on the Spy, and then the Spy registers as an outsider to the Undertaker goes, either I was poisoned or that is the Spy. If the Spy is just regularly executed and the Librarian got a 0 and the Undertaker says, I saw the Spy as an outsider, the Librarian goes, well, I know that there's none in play, according to my ability. And the Storyteller wouldn't let me do that if it was unhelpful to the good team. Looking at you in particular. Because that's the main thing, is that the Librarian 0 is something that you can do, but you have to be very mindful that sometimes it will be more unhelpful to the good team. And a lot of times that an advanced player receives that information, will just question and doubt everything and like not have it work in a way that's helpful. One of the ones that I want to test, and again, this is not advice, but you have a setup. I don't think 7 works. I think maybe 10 works. You have your 2 minions. You don't put the Baron in play, and then you give 3 outsiders as the bluffs to the evil team. And then you have a Librarian with a 0. Suddenly, the Librarian 0 is very powerful. But I haven't tested that. I'm curious to see if that would just be a horrible time or not, because it just depends on how well the evil team is able to work with it. But this in particular, like, you have to see the purpose of the Librarian 0. Is it there to catch the spy? Now, the other option is the Baron, and we have a real outsider, let's say the Saint. We have a real outsider. The Librarian, seeing a 0, tells the Librarian that they are the drunk if they believe the Saint is real. This is an almost identical setup that I ran. Actually, it was like one of the really, really early Clocktower games that I ran and uploaded to this channel, where the idea was to have 3 pairs of players. One of the pairs was the Librarian 0 and the Saint. Basically, they talk to each other on the first day. The Saint goes, "I'm the Saint," and the Librarian goes, "I'm a Librarian with a 0. I have to be the drunk. I believe you that there is a Baron in play. Let's go. We solved the whole game." Instead of what I thought was going to happen, where the Librarian goes, "I got a 0. You can't be the Saint. You're evil." It didn't quite. They just trusted each other immediately. So it is kind of a Baron confirmation in itself. The second thing that could happen in this scenario is that the Librarian is the drunk and sees the drunk between one of 2 other players. Because when the Librarian sees a drunk, it's actually between 1 and 3, because either the Librarian has correctly seen a drunk between 2 people, or the Librarian themselves is the drunk and those 2 other people are not. And it's just creating the myth of misinformation, which is a bit rough. In this scenario, I think it's a hard choice. I think the Librarian being the drunk and seeing a 0 isn't super crazy, but it can potentially get the Saint killed if the Saint isn't a super trusted player. The Librarian could be the drunk and see a Saint in play that's 2 other different people, which I think is much more helpful. Or the Librarian being a drunk and seeing the Recluse between the Imp and the Baron, I think is also much more helpful to the game state rather than getting a Librarian 0. Now let's add a seat. Now we are at 8 players. Close this. Select characters. Now we're at 8 players, which means we have 1 outsider by default, and so the Saint could load into the game, or we have a drunk. Now the scenario where we have a drunk, which is someone, let's change. Hello, I'm trying to click buttons. Let's change the Saint to be the Mayor. The Mayor, who is the drunk, and the Poisoner poisons the Librarian. Can I show the Librarian a 0 here? Well, Trouble Brewing doesn't have any scenarios that remove outsiders from the default. So in an 8-player game, if the Librarian receives a 0, they go, "Well, I'm the drunk," or "I'm poisoned." And that's not very helpful information to give, unfortunately. In this setup, even with the Librarian poisoned, showing a drunk between 2 is still like really detrimental. Which is fine. And then 9 is similar, where we're going to have a default thing. Having a character, the Saint, which is in play, and then the Librarian being poisoned and not seeing the Saint. Being poisoned and seeing a 0 doesn't quite work here. Being poisoned and seeing a drunk somewhere else, and then people go, "Wait a minute, either the Librarian is evil or the Saint is not real." As you can see, as we are starting to delve into this further, it's very easy to give a Librarian incredibly detrimental information to the good team. In this setup, the Librarian and the Saint, you should just be showing the Librarian and the Saint most of the time. And if it's a more advanced group, sometimes the evil team might figure it out and double claim. Because, for example, if we have the spy here, the spy sees the Librarian, see the Saint. And we could have outsider wrong, outsider right. And the spy goes, yeah, I'm also the saint. And so now they have two saints, and they know one of them is evil, and they have to figure out which one is the real one. But again, advanced players might probably figure it out that it would be the minion who is double claiming and not necessarily the demon. And again, this is an interesting setup. And then now let's look at 9. Going from 8 to 9, you can always just +1 the drunk, which isn't crazy helpful. Let me move my librarian up to this corner so it's not hiding behind my shoulder. So we can have this exact same setup, except we're going to have another outsider. Let's put the butler in. Love the butler. So we have a librarian who is next to a butler, has a saint in play, sees drunk between spy and mayor. Good. Okay, I've heard of 3 outsiders. Is it a Baron game? Well, we don't have a recluse claim unless if the evil team jumps on the recluse claim and then goes, well, it has to be a Baron. Now, can we show a 0 here? Probably not. It's 9 players. It's based 2 outsiders. There's nothing that's going to remove 2 outsiders from play. If you show a librarian a 0 here, they're going to go, this is telling me one of the outsiders is lying and that I am the drunk. Even in a poisoner scenario, like, if the poisoner selects the librarian and it's 2 outsiders by default and you show the librarian a 0 because they were poisoned, the librarian knows that conflicts with the default setup, which could not have been changed to have 0 outsiders. So the librarian goes, I am poisoned. My information is wrong. You've chosen to tell me nothing instead of give me information for me to try and solve if my information is correct and try and solve the game. Which I think is less fun. This is like the balloonist seeing themselves, the washerwoman seeing themselves as the washerwoman, the grandmother seeing themselves as the grandmother or whatever. It's unhelpful and it removes the person from playing the game because there's no thing that they can offer, for solving the narrative as a good player, but also there's like no puzzle for them to decipher. They just go, yes, this is the thing that's happened to me. You, the storyteller, have chosen for me to have a bad time, and then they just kind of move on straight away. Now, let's have a look at 10 players, because we want to add the Baron. Let's put him down. I don't want to nominate that person. I want to change the character. The Baron. So let's say this is the setup verbatim. We have 10 players. We have the Baron who's added the Saint and the Butler, and we have the Spy. Should the Librarian see a 0 here? Well, they would have to specifically be poisoned, which currently they could not be. We'd have to change our outside account. Can it ping off the Spy and see something? Show drunk, show reckless on the Spy. Possibly also fine. Showing recluse on the Spy, I think, would make it harder to believe the Butler or the Saint, which is potentially detrimental. You also have to keep in mind that with this exact setup, let's just add a fortune teller here. With this exact setup, the Imp is sitting next to the Spy and will get the Grimoire immediately. They learn that the fortune teller is the only person that could receive information that could help them solve the game. They kill the fortune teller on the first night. The fortune teller knows that 2 people are not the demon. They are basically the knight. Whether or not the Virgin activates, like if the Spy activates on the Virgin, then the evil team is years ahead. And then the Undertaker is the only person that can receive your information. I think this is a very, very evil-focused setup. The Baron is very powerful in that it removes 2 townsfolk from the game, which is like 2 less pieces of information. So even if we swap these around and we go Empath and give me another information character, what about the Chef? So even this setup, the imp kills the fortune teller immediately. The chef you could show a 0 or a 1 based on whatever you want, right? I would show a 1 here. I think that's the fairest and safest option. Then you have an empath with a 0 confirming the saint, pretty good. And then I would show I'd have the librarian see the saint in this scenario as well, because they're already kind of trusted by the empath. It's really unlikely they're going to get executed. The evil team is already going to have so much power in knowing the entire grimoire and getting rid of the Undertaker and the Fortune Teller pretty early, and so having that confirmation chain is going to be good, right? So it's a bit tough to see a balance with something like this, but ultimately, can the librarian see a 0 in this setup? No. Now, if we remove the saint, let's put in the Slayer, and the librarian is the drunk. Can we show a 0? Yes, because the person who receives the brunt of that is the butler, which it doesn't have a lose condition stable to them. It's not the saint. It's not as much of a big deal. Same with the recluse. You could have a recluse, and the librarian is receiving a 0 here, and that pushes them to execute the recluse. Big deal. Not that much is lost. I still think in this setup, because the spy is so powerful, if this was maybe the Scarlet Woman, I would feel a bit more balanced about this, a bit more comfortable showing a 0 to the librarian, because you have the chef information that's relevant, the fortune teller that could potentially find the demon, and the Undertaker that's going to help clear up the butler and the librarian's disparities and help solve the game. And the empath is located in a good spot as well. So it's kind of approaching a little bit more balanced. This is possibly the setup where a librarian 0 actually accomplishes something. With the difference of the entire evil team only receiving outsiders as bluffs. Which is extra funny, because if you do it in a setup where there's default 0 outsiders, the evil team's like, well, I knew they were not going to be in play anyway. So I think this is a fine setup. Let's go +1, and then we head on to 11. So 11 has 1 outsider by default, and now it is a bit harder to show a librarian 0. However, if there's no butler, a librarian 0 tells the librarian that they are the drunk. No one else could be the drunk. I know I have a Baron here, but we're ignoring that for a second. When the Baron says we should have 3, we are going to remove the Baron from that, put the spy back in. And we should have an outsider by default, which would be either the drunk. If the librarian is the drunk, they have solved the outsider count, basically. If we have something like a recluse over here, and the librarian pings a 0, they would have to be poisoned. Instead of the spy, it would have to be the poisoner, or instead of the Scarlet Woman, it would have to be the poisoner. So swap them. So the poisoner poisons the librarian receives a 0, and the librarian goes, well, I have to be poisoned or drunk, which is unhelpful. Again, that's just, you the storyteller bullying this player. Even if the chef gets a 3, and they go, yes, there's a recluse. Now, there's this funky interaction here, right? Now, the recluse says you might register as evil and as a minion or demon even if dead. Now, this is slightly vague. It says you might register as evil and as a minion or demon even if dead. It does not say additionally, and it does not say instead, right? If it was additionally, then the recluse is still at that time an outsider. If it says instead, then the recluse at that time is not an outsider, and then the recluse registering as evil would mean that the librarian does not see an outsider in play. And I do not believe that is how it works. You should not be interpreting it that way. I think that is incredibly damaging. And so in this scenario, the librarian either has to see the recluse or ping off the spy. In a scenario where the recluse registers evil and the librarian can legitimately receive a 0, I think would be like really unfair for the good team, but it would be a puzzle to solve that no trouble brewing player has like ever seen before, which would be kind of brutal. But again, the librarian in that scenario would just assume that they are poisoned, which I think is not necessarily the most graceful choice. Let's close this. Now we are at 12. So 12 has 2 outsiders by default, and if you are storytelling and you forget the count, it is always there in that bottom right corner. But I always just count up from 7. 7 is 0, 8 is 1, 9 is 2, 10 is 0, 11 is 1, 12 is, and so on, which makes it pretty easy. And so now that we have 2 on base, and again, there's nothing that removes outsiders from the base setup, the librarian has to ping off something. It's kind of the same problem. And pretty much all these play counts where there is default outsiders, the librarian shouldn't really be receiving a 0. So we're going to skip to 13 because I think because I think 13 has the most play in it. Let's go select characters. Let's clear them. Actually, let's just go clear the grimoire. Because I like putting things into the blender and seeing where they come out sitting rather than me just saying them. Cool. So 13 players. We must have the imp. We must have the librarian. It's ostensibly Stormcourt for the purposes of this video. So what setup for 13 players can we do for the librarian to receive 0? Well, if we do a setup like this, it doesn't really matter what townsfolk I pick. If we do a setup like this, there is no outsiders in play, and the librarian receiving a 0 is communicating to them that the Baron is not in play, which is helpful information. In a big player game, 13 players, there is a lot of townsfolk that exist, and it is likely to be giving a bluff. Like, let's have a look at what's left. There's 8 characters remaining, 4 of which are townsfolk, 4 of which are outsiders. So you could give bluffs the demon, let's say recluse, let's say slayer, let's say virgin. These are really shit bluffs to give to the demon, by the way. I think the virgin is really rough as a bluff to give to the demon because if it doesn't activate, then they're like, oh dang. But if the imp can pass a virgin bluff off to the Baron, that can potentially deal some damage, and isn't terrible. I think Slayer is fine, and I think Recluse is on the low end, but not terrible. It's like the worst of the good category. And so if the imp passes the Recluse bluff to the poison or something like that, or the imp claims to be the Recluse, the librarian goes, well, you're not. I would know, because I'm the librarian, and I know about all of the outsiders. It's in the catalog. And that creates a tension there that doesn't, potentially be solved. Because the evil team can argue, it's like, well, yeah, it's a Baron. I'm the only, public outside of the Recluse. You must, in that case, be the drunk. And I think that is maybe the one time where that scenario is really interesting. And then if the librarian finds a virgin that is actually going to play not one of the bluffs and does nominate and get executed and goes, look, I'm a townsfolk. I'm not the drunk. You cannot be the Recluse because I got a 0. And they're like, well, you've been poisoned. And they're like, well, where's the drunk? And I think there's a lot of interesting play with that. Not having a Baron in play, the librarian receiving the correct information. They have to figure out if they doubt it or not. Some other things to look at with this setup. We have a chef down the bottom here that would be getting a 1. We have the fortune teller. Who would I make the red herring for the fortune teller? That's an interesting choice. I actually like the investigator here as the red herring. And then we show the investigator, the spy. and the Undertaker. In my last video of setting up advanced games for Trouble Brewing, the investigator seeing the Undertaker as the spy is the wrong ping, I think is really interesting. It adds a level of detriment to the good team without specifically having misinformation. It reveals the spy correctly, but still puts doubt on the real Undertaker, which I think is interesting. And then the cost of that, we can bully the investigator by making them the red herring. You have an empath, which is receiving a 0. Seems to be the trend. If the Ravenkeeper is killed or executed, I would show the empath a 1. I would show them the evil spy. Just because the spy has the line of text that says you might register as good, a townsfolk, or an outsider, it does not mean that you need to do it ever. You can just not do it. The spy is really powerful in just seeing the grimoire and telling the demon the grimoire. In just accomplishing that, the spy doesn't necessarily need to hide and survive. And if there's a Scarlet Woman and the imp dies or star passes, the Scarlet Woman picks it up. The spy doesn't need to have an ironclad bluff to catch the imp star pass and then, run the rest of the race for them. So it is fine to implicate a spy. There is a lot of games, and I think the meta is that something will happen, like the imp will kill the Undertaker on the first night, or the imp will kill a monk early, or a fortune teller, and then people go, oh, they got 2 kills in a row that were the most impactful information characters. We have to have a spy, or a suspicious virgin activation, or something like that. And then here we go, oh, there's a spy, and they can't find it, but they feel its impact on the game. Conversely, if you have a bunch of information that really, really obviously points to a spy, people might not necessarily believe it to be true, because they're like, wow, why would you show the spy in 4 different evil pings? Why would you try and convince everyone that the spy is in play? And then you go, wait, maybe it's the recluse or whatever. And depending on how clever the spy is and if they can pull off a bluff like that, it might make all the difference. We have our Librarian 0, we have our Chef 1, and then everything comes down to, how much helpful information the fortune teller can get. A lot of the focus of the game is going to be in this little corner. The Librarian with the 0, the spy who has been seen by the investigator, and then the imp is probably going to be, easily staying around for a while. And then also, depending on who the poisoner hits, is how detrimental things can be. If the poison hits the empath, I think I still show a 0. Showing a 1 here would be really brutal. Especially when there's so much noise over here. Hitting the fortune teller just fully depends on who they pick. I'm happy to light up anyone as evil in a fortune teller ping because I know that the red herring exists. Hitting the chef, I think it would be fine to show a 0 in that case. Especially because there's no evil person next to the spy. Because what might happen is the chef goes, I got a 1. The investigator goes, well, I see a minion between seat 6 and seat 9. And so with the chef's 1, that means that either seat 10, seat 8, seat 7, or seat 5 are evil. The empath goes, well, I vouch for seat 5. And the chef goes, well, I'm next to seat 9, and it's not me, I'm the one with the information. And so either seat 10 or seat 7 come under heat. Thinking about these kind of things and how a script is going to potentially unravel will give you the ability to help you balance stuff. Because if you're like, oh, I predicted this, what could I have done to balance this? What do I need to change? Do I need to move the red herring somewhere? Do I need to change what the investigator saw based on the chef information? How do I want to change things? Let's clear it, and we'll do one more setup, and I'll run through the whole thing, and we'll have a look again if we can see a Librarian 0. Clear. So we need the imp. This time we're going to have the Baron, because that is the main difference. We're going to have the drunk, and we're going to have the butler, and then just our top row of characters, and the Slayer. Yes, that's correct. Cool. So there is an outsider in play, and the Librarian should be seeing the butler. Also, someone will be the drunk. Most storytellers would see the empath next to Scarlet Woman and make that person the drunk. I think we actually could double down. We go Undertaker drunk. Investigator sees the Scarlet Woman between these two players. The Librarian. Nah, between the bottom seems wrong. I don't think I can show. Like, it would have to literally be like this. The poisoner picks the Librarian, and suddenly we go, boys, we are on. And we go Librarian 0. Because we have a butler, which has been seen as the Scarlet Woman. We have the Scarlet Woman, which has been seen by the investigator. And we have an empath, which has a 1. And the empath 1 is between the drunk Undertaker, so if they're executed, not a big deal, and the Scarlet Woman. And if they're executed, we show Recluse. That explains the empath ping, that explains the investigator ping. The Scarlet Woman gets by, and they are not confirmed evil. The evil team goes, well, we lose the Scarlet Woman, but the imp isn't really under that much threat currently. Which I think is fine. We do have a Chef 1 between the Baron and the Poisoner, which I think is not a big deal. The Chef 1 doesn't hurt our very evil-looking Scarlet Woman, because the investigator is sitting next to them and the empath is sitting next to them. The two evil pings that vilify them are kind of, you would have to be an evil player throwing a teammate under the bus, which I don't really see the point. Unless it's the empath, like jumping on, like, yeah, I got a 1. Let's kill this guy. I don't see a way for that to like cause a chef in a chain reaction, an additional execution there. If we see the Librarian 0, the butler looks sus because they were seen in the ping. But also they're just kind of sus generally. They're also like really stuck between a big crowd of your players. If this was the Recluse, that would be like way more detrimental. Chef gets a 1, 2, 3, and they're like, what? Lord of Typhon gameplay. I think this is fine. Undertaker drunk here, I like. Fortune teller or red herring. So, the fortune teller red herring does not specifically need to be a townsfolk. It says good player. We can make the butler have a very fun time by being the red herring. They are both seen as the Scarlet Woman and are the red herring. And suddenly the butler has a lot more interest in their existence, let's say. Which I think is fine. We have a Slayer sitting next to the demon. And the fortune teller. So the fortune teller hits the demon, the Slayer might get some big ideas. And then we have a washerwoman that we need to try and confirm. Now, here's the other interesting play. In a game without a Baron, and if the evil team's trying to set a Baron narrative, and the Librarian has been seen by the washerwoman, they know that they can't be the drunk. So that's an option. I don't know if it's a great option. This is one of those things where I'm just like, you know what, let's just try it. And then give it to the Baron. Having the Baron be the wrong ping for something like a Librarian or a washerwoman is really funny to me, because the Baron players got no downside to being executed. They might as well just say, yeah, that's me, which is kind of funny. But I also consider a lot the placement of the players in the circle. The washerwoman is much more likely to talk to the Librarian on the kind of the fact that they're neighbors than the Baron. So they might get a confirm earlier on the Librarian. But I think this is a fine setup. I don't think this is crazy unbalanced. The poisoner hitting the Librarian on the first night is kind of low impact compared to what some of the other options could have been. Hitting the fortune teller might have been most detrimental. Hitting the empath, I probably show a 2 in this setup, because killing the drunk Undertaker isn't that big of a deal. Killing the Scarlet Woman was always intended. Hitting the chef, I show a 3. That'd be really funny. because it tells the chef there's a big group of evil players next to each other. We have all of the pings on the butler, and then all the other evil players are sitting next to them. It's actually more helpful for the good team for the chef to get the wrong number, the 3, than to receive a 0, which I think is very funny. And, you know, it's not a terrible choice. It's not a terrible choice. I don't... Like, the Slayer's not going to change so much, the Undertaker's not going to change so much. If the Investigator's poison, I don't know. I probably would keep it the same. The poisoner would be angry at me if I did that. But I still probably would keep it the same, because they're gonna, you know, get seen by the empath anyway. It's again better to double down rather than try and hide and fix the problem. I also want to shy away from just always making the empath the drunk if they're next to an evil player, because it's very commonly done, and empaths kind of just get to the point where they're like, well, I just never trust my information, and it's kind of brutal. First of all, no one believes an empath exists, because evil team very, very often bluffs it, because they will know exactly what the number should be. Often a 0. They will always just kind of say a 0. So it's tough. But hopefully this gives you some things to think about when it comes to setting up balanced games of Trouble Brewing. How often should you show a Librarian 0? Well, in Trouble Brewing, the answer probably is never. Just probably never. Maybe in a 13-player game, there's no Baron. It has some value. But maybe in advanced scripts, where you do have stuff like the Godfather that could remove Outsiders, stuff like the Vigor Mortis that could remove Outsiders, the Librarian receiving a 0 in an 8-player game or an 11-player game could actually be very helpful in detecting a Vigor Mortis. And so in more advanced scripts, there is more, you know, space for play like that. But on Trouble Brewing, probably not. The answer is probably no. 99% of the time, you should not show a Librarian 0 in Trouble Brewing, even though the text is written there. Even though it feels spicy, your responsibility as a storyteller is to provide a balanced game, you know, way, way up here. That's, you know, your first order business. Way below trying out some goofy shit. If the game is unbalanced, then the goofy shit is not fun and interesting. It comes at the expense of a player having a good time, which means that you, the storyteller, is instead having a good time, and that breaks your oath. You, as a storyteller, you swear a solemn oath that you will do no harm, and that you will create only fun games to the best of your ability to all the players. And I know this because I fuck up games all the time. I've run some deeply shit games. And through doing that, I've learned and I've become better. And I do stuff like this where I think about what setups should look like and what is game balance and how things can be done. And I play a lot of games. And through that, I work towards how can I create the best games that I can? How can I create the most fun for my players? And I'm trying to, you know, bestow this information upon you. So keep thinking about it. Keep playing around with stuff. You know, solitarying like this, where you build a rack up and go, okay, what would I do here? What is the best choice? Is really easy practice to do. I also have a lot of videos on the channel where I run through setups that can help give you some ideas and, you know, part upon to you some of my knowledge of the game. I will have a whole playlist up, which is just building setups. Just building setups to help you go through, use that as a tool, go through and, you know, study a little bit and help in your journey to becoming a better storyteller. I will also just have a random video up on the screen. It might just be me playing the Blood on the Clocktower, you know, the greatest board game there ever was. But it could be some other stuff. I do some Let's Plays in this channel. I do some game design discussion when I talk about how things are built. I make a lot of custom, you know, homebrew Blood on the Clocktower characters, so maybe something like that. Maybe it's something else that is goofy and fun, and you should maybe check that out as well. And as always, there is the subscribe button. I greatly appreciate all of my subscribers because I'm trying to get to 1,000. I'm doing a video upload every single day for 2025, which is a monumental task. But a great percentage of those uploads are going to be Blood on the Clocktower, so if you're a big fan, you should stick around because I know for a fact that there is a lot of cool stuff coming soon. And if you click the subscribe button, it will be delivered upon to you, and you won't miss any. You won't miss any of the cool stuff that's upcoming. You won't miss any of these more storyteller advice kinds of videos that I have scheduled and coming soon.